Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekhachari Wagh, Assistant Professor, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I have coordinated this paper on Sociology of India, and under the larger theme of origin, growth and institutionalization of sociology in India, this module is titled Crises of Sociology in terms of its teaching, research and pedagogical practices. This module will engage with the manner in which the crisis is conceptualized, what is the whole debate of crises, who are the scholars in India who have engaged with the concept of crises, especially in terms of sociological research and teaching and its practices. We will also explore how does this whole debate of crises help us to understand the way we understand sociology and understand us, our role that we play as students, teachers, researchers, scholars, and engage with this whole idea of sociology in its institutions and practices. It will also understand the various different aspects of the debate as scholars have tried to conceptualize the manner in which crises in India, especially with regard to the way sociology is practiced, is understood, debated and evaluated. Crises in Sociology of India, Research, Teaching and its Practices. What is this debate all about? Scholars over the years have discussed, analyzed and engaged intermittently over the sociology as a discipline in India, debating upon the relevance of the discipline, its subject matter, its growth and trajectory have become matter of course. Scholars in India have critically reflected one's own disciplinary trajectories, and there are also have been a serious engagement with its teaching and pedagogical practices, research process, growth and disciplinary margins. Furthermore, formal discussions within workshops, meetings, seminars and conferences and informal conversations over tea, coffee generally reflect a sense of despair, anguish and concern over the state of sociology in India. Our aim in this module is to bring together the engagement of scholars in India with their analysis and arguments with regard to the crises in sociology in India. In this module, when we discuss about the crises, it will engage with four important issues. The first, how does one conceptualize the crisis? Second, who are the scholars in India who have engaged with one another with regard to the crisis? Third, puts together these debates upon can we build up a framework to analyze the crisis? And fourth, what do we do after analyzing the crisis? A reflection on the analysis will address the above concern. The Sociology in India crisis debate. Scholars who have engaged with the issue of crises in sociology include Y.B. Damle, M.N. Srinivas, M.N. Panini in 1970s, T.K. Umen in the 1980s, Veena Das, Anant, Giri, Satish Deshpande, C.B. Venkatesha Murthy, Sharmila Rege, Sujata Patel, Ramesh, Bairy in the 90s and 2000. Their engagements with regard to the issues concerning sociological practices in India form the core of the debate with regard to sociology in India. Veena Das, Crises in Sociology. Veena Das in her article Sociological Research in India, The State of Crisis, commences by pointing out that the crises in sociological research exist at three levels, namely the University Grants Commission and that of the Indian Sociological Society, each of whose role is understood in a framework constructed by the practice of politics. Since research is based on patient progress of the respective students' academic standards, the aspect of more significance is competence rather than that of brilliance, which is not ascribed but which has to be achieved. Das moves on to cite that her personal experience as a professor at the University of Delhi for the past 25 years as an interviewer of students from various universities, as a member of the selection committee for lecturers, research associates in universities and UGC, makes her notice a sharp increase in the number of lecturers, doctoral students and research associates hailing from state and central universities, many of whom have accomplished an MPhil. However, the boom is not substantiated by excellence and competencies on part of the researchers, and the reasons that the author cites for such a tragic scenario range from lack of systematic reading leading to lack of efficiency, ignorance of elementary facts, lack of elaboration on generalities, inabilities to explicate the basic arguments of the reference list of dissertation, lack of emphasis on library research coupled with incompetent fieldwork and surveys, publication of substandard materials through subsidy, plagiarism. but she does not omit the mention of the existence of competent scholars carrying out well-designed research and contributing to the academia extensively in order to provide plurality of perspectives to understand Indian society, the proper utilization of which necessitates appropriate institutional framework. Thus, thereafter explains the concept of crisis, which according to her refers to, for the purpose of policy making, the act of treating all institutions equally without considering the respective academic record that is plagued by substandard research. The factors amounting to the crisis situation can be traced at three levels. At the level of universities, incompetence in teaching and research, failing to keep pace with discipline's growth, coupled with utilization of outdated reading materials, lack of initiative on part of the students to acquire proficiency in English language, being encouraged by sustaining regional languages as the medium of instruction in many universities, improper policy for recruitment and promotion, along with the role of political patronage in the process, the evaluation of PhD dissertations by incompetent examiners, and the perception of appointment of examiners from abroad as a means of colonial subjugation of one's mind. Further, the evaluation on the basis of reciprocity instead of determining academic standard, and lastly, the lack of examiners for evaluation of PhD dissertations in regional languages compromise a significant basis for the crisis at the university level. At the next level, the decision-making body of UGC itself perpetuates faulty notions about social science research, and thus there exists a correlation between students and the supervisors, the pressure to obtain a PhD and to gather credits for producing PhD students respectively. The situation being difficult to be solved by national evaluation scheme. The situation therefore necessitates consolidation of resources to cater to the needs of competent students and appointing competent supervisors. Additional shortcomings at this level include recruitment of scholars with poor research skill, thereby calling for the modification of the process of appointment, which can be practiced through establishment of research committees and professional help. The professional bodies do not fulfill the duty to address the situation, whose role lies not in increasing the number of jobs but ensuring the practice is in line with the ethical principles. One can situate the role of ISS in this context, whose responsibility is the preparation of a report on the state of social research in India that can serve as a foundation for the task of uplifting and improving the state of the present scenario. Anant, Giri, Community of Discourse as answer to the crisis. The first scholar to engage with Veena's questions and concerns was Anant Giri. In his article titled Creating a Community of Discourse in Sociology in India, he strongly argues for indigenization by critiquing Das for uncritical metropolitanism. Giri in his article presents four major issues concerning metropolitanism of Das. 1. Das takes for granted the discursive field of sociology. Giri argues that sociologists have not questioned the accepted paradigms of sociological research, and neither have they created a curriculum of sociology and anthropology that takes into consideration our own cultural predicament, especially an Indian point of view. Next, according to Giri, Das has depended very much on the English language. According to Giri, one must understand that every student in sociology in India may not be well versed with English. So, one must encourage writing in Indian languages, especially mother tongues. 3. Giri believes that one should build a community of discourse. How does one conceptualize this community of discourse? According to Giri, to build such community requires egoless interaction and communication with among the peers. Before making the critique of Indian sociological society as an institution, one should analyze how many of the leading practitioners of the discipline are involved with it. Finally, one should encourage publishing, especially efforts at the local level. In its core, Giri's arguments were pushing towards an argument where he states emphatically that before critiquing this other, there is a need to reflect on the self. What does an analysis of Giri's article convey? In the following section, I will deal with the critique offered by the scholars who were part of the debate. But for me, the arguments, especially the conceptualization of creating a community of the discourse, was paradoxical. Why? Because while Giri was critiquing Das for her uncritical metropolitanism, he himself takes an uncritical stand by making sweeping statements such as the need to take seriously our own cultural predicament and Indian culture, without contextualizing what R refers to, and one states Indian culture, what does it actually imply? In such a diverse country like India, the statements such as the one stated above are problematic unless they are contextualized. Venkatesha Murthy, bringing back the stalwarts into the debate. Going further in the debate, one has a response of G.B. Venkatesha Murthy And the short piece titled Crisis in Sociological Research is important because Murthy brought into the 90s the discussion of crises. The arguments made by Y.B. Damle, M.N. Srinivas, M.N. Panini and T.K. Uman made in the 70s and the 80s. It is important because it does reflect the fact that sociology in India, through the work cited above, did have moments of reflexivity, though admittedly very few. Based on the works, Murthy argues that there are three important reasons leading towards building of crises in sociology, mostly based on the fact that the problem lies with the kind of students who have taken up sociology as a discipline. The first is the perception of sociology as a soft discipline, thereby not attracting good intelligent students. Second, mediocre students apply for a sociology course because they do not get admissions everywhere. Third, sociology attracts a residue. And fourth, the admission policy is not rigorous. It is full of gaps so that classrooms are filled with uninterested mediocre students. Murthy in his article starts with citing Y.B. Damle, who stated, "It is well known that in India, the majority of the brightest students are attracted to science, technology and professional courses. Even in the arts, social sciences and humanities, the brighter ones tend to choose either mathematics or economics. Obviously, those who choose sociology are not necessarily the best, nor do they necessarily have any clear notion of why they choose a subject, which has definite implications for their interest and performance." Based on the above analysis, Murthy states that the students choose sociology as a subject of last resort and not really interested in the development of the discipline. Further, by drawing on Srinivas and Panini, Murthy also reflected on the admission process, where he argued that there has been no attempt to restrict admissions on the qualification and aptitude of the students. The admission process is full of gaps, which in turn has impacted sociological research negatively. Further, Murthy, citing Srinivas, argued that along with the substandard quality of students, the teachers appointed are also not of quality because in recent times, appointments are made with regard to consideration of caste, region and linguistic parameters and not on merit, which has accelerated the deplorable condition of sociological research and teaching. This point of Srinivas, which is reiterated by Murthy, was made in relation to the reservation policy of the state and that needs to be engaged with. If this is a state, then how does one deal with it? To address the problems faced by sociological research, Murthy now refers to the arguments made by Uman that in order to bring about positive change within sociology, three interrelated processes must be followed. 1. Restructuring of the education policy. 2. Established academics must mentor young scholars. And 3. A need to develop the aptitude, commitment and academic skills of young scholars. Evaluating Murthy's analysis reveals that in his analysis, all the problems associated with the discipline are related to the students and there is no critical analysis. Evaluating Murthy's analysis reveals that in his analysis, all problems associated with the disciplines are related to the student and then there is no critical analysis of either the system of higher education and or the teachers who are part of the structure. Satish Deshpande, Contextualizing the Debate. Satish Deshpande refers to the disciplinary fatigue of sociology as a discipline. According to him, Veena Das's questions and concerns with regard to crises in sociology are important and need to be engaged with. The fact that there have been few responses to her concerns with regard to the crises plaguing the discipline needs to be addressed. For Deshpande, the problem with Das's analysis was that, though it raised important issues, the argument lacked conceptual clarity. A close analysis of the article reveals that we need to be aware that not only sociology but all social sciences, the university system and Indian education system are suffering from this crisis. So, it is important to understand then the specificity of crises affecting sociology in order to engage with it. In addition, we need to recognize that the issues articulated by Das, such as lack of commitment, islands of excellence, lack of competences among students, are issues faced by social sciences in general. Therefore, to analyze the specificity of sociology, Deshpande states that we need to locate it within the genealogy of sociology in India, especially in the process of discipline formation, that is within the transition from a colonial to a post-colonial regime. The argument that emerges from reading Deshpande is that post-independence disciplines has a clear-cut responsibility chalked out. In this context, history had taken up the responsibility of restructuring the past of the nation in making, and economics had become the mainstay of Nehruvian socialism. Compared to them, sociology appeared as an ambiguous and a disabling identity. If one takes this argument of Deshpande and reflects on the way the discipline has been established, then one comes out with a feeling that the processes of growth and institutionalization of sociology as a soft discipline which did not require serious intellectual endeavour was slowly but steadily becoming established. The field of sociology was perceived to be ambiguous, very vast, including everyday aspects of our life and society, so it was believed that sociological analysis was equivalent to having an opinion. This feeling was established very strongly in the manner in which it was taught, learnt and disseminated. Further, the subject area of the discipline being everyday experience, students perceive sociology as equivalent to common sense. Students and teachers feel that they know everything there is to know about society, especially sociology of India, caste, village, joint family, because they live and experience it. Further, there is a belief that by theorizing these simple things, facts of living in society, sociology makes them unnecessarily complicated. Therefore, the major task to be dealt with by sociologists is to question the illusion of understanding created by common sense in everyday practices. Going back to Deshpande's arguments with regard to crises, due to the ambiguity in defining itself, sociology as a discipline faced with what he refers to as identity crisis. This identity crisis was strengthened, Deshpande argues, given the fact that sociology in India addressed issues of religion, caste, class, custom, manners, cultures and issues which was closer to ethnography than to the established version of the mainstream discipline in Western sociology. A very well known sociologist, Andre Bethe, stated that when he is in India, he is referred to as sociologist, and while he is in the West, he is introduced as an anthropologist. The students are requested to refer to the first module of the paper titled Colonialism, Anthropology and Sociology, which deals extensively with this issue. Thus, an analysis of Deshpande's argument regarding identity crisis of sociology could be understood within the very core that makes up the discipline. What does that actually mean? What I am driving at is, reading Deshpande gives an idea that at the time when the Indian nation state was trying its best to establish itself as a modern nation state based upon the nationalist fervour, the young state driving ahead and planning for the future, a discipline like sociology could be problematic unless trimmed off its radical edge. If sociology was engaged in critical inquiry, such as engaging with issues of hierarchy and inequality within caste, understanding the politics of nationalism, examining customs based on violence and difference, analyzing culture, then as a discipline it would be critiquing the nation rather than building it. With few exceptions, sociology in India was institutionalized within the largely Parsonian model of positivism, which was the dominant discourse of the time. What then became defined as sociology in India was uncritical, descriptive and fractured observations of Indian customs, culture, language, religion, family, and was celebrated for its uniqueness. So it is no wonder that students, teachers and in general sociologists in India largely do not ask any questions and forget about critical questioning. For me as a teacher of sociology, teaching sociology of India for the past 5 years, the moment of crisis is when in the class I wait futilely for a question to be asked of me by my students. After establishing a probable analysis as to why sociology is undergoing a crisis, Deshpande goes on to explain what can be done to deal with the crisis. He has stated 5 ways through which the crisis within sociology could be dealt with. 1. He argues that one needs to be self-reflexive both with the discipline but also with oneself, that it is a practicing sociologist. To explain reflexivity exercise with oneself, Deshpande used the example of the argument of Veena with regard to inferior quality of available textbooks within sociology. According to Deshpande, rather than lamenting about the quality of textbooks, one should write and develop good textbooks, which unfortunately is not on the agenda of well-established good scholars. 2. There is a need for training, monitoring and encouraging of young scholars by established scholars, thereby creating sustainable support structures. 3. Rather than demanding more centralization, which was the argument of Veena as mentioned above, Deshpande calls for decentralization of resources to regional and state universities so as to strengthen their base. 4th, there is a need to develop a sense of accountability within the leading centers referred to as national. According to him, without such accountability, centralized structures run the risk of breeding narcissist elites accountable to no one. 5th is to ask the question as to why sociology did not become the discipline in the 80s. Deshpande argued that during the 1980s, Indian state faced critical problems that were social in nature, movements based on ethnic and religious identities, caste questions in supposedly casteless middle class societies, and the growth and prevalence of communalism. Except for very few scholars, sociology as a discipline did not engage with these questions. Deshpande writes of this as a sociology did not rise to the occasion except for the few interventions. As a discipline, sociology failed. In this answer, Deshpande believes lies the reason towards understanding the crises inflecting sociology. Sharmila Rege, relooking at the debate. Sharmila Rege joins the debate and argues that the crisis in sociological research and teaching has to be located in three interrelated issues: the syllabi, responses of the discipline to the challenges to it from within and outside the academia, and pedagogical practices. Sociology has not dealt with these issues effectively, thereby leading to a state of crisis. It is important to analyze each of these issues. According to Rege, discussions with students reveal that they opt for sociology because it is assumed to be a soft discipline, notes easily available, and it is preparing ground for civil services. As far as the syllabi are concerned, the issue is that the syllabi and the content such as basic concepts and sociological theories and thought are taught and discussed in the class have hardly any linkages with the lived context of the students and the teachers. More often than not, both the students and the teachers feel disconnected with the subject. Rege argues that women's studies have posed an important challenge to sociology, especially with regard to its content and methodology. Such questioning was very important in radically pushing the boundaries of the discipline. Which are the issues within sociology that has been challenged by women's studies? Women's studies, according to Rege, has directed attention to the invisibility of women within sociological research and literature. The problem lies with the very structuring of sociological methods. Feminist methods, which include consciousness raising through research, challenging the dichotomy of object and subject of research, and raising complex questions of power in writing and process of research, have posed questions to sociological methodology on various methodological techniques. Rege argues that feminist methodology further demands a shift from women's standpoint to a standpoint that bears in mind the complex collusions and contestations between class, caste, gender and communities. Unfortunately, by and large, methodology practiced within sociology has not addressed or engaged with feminist methodology, let alone use it. The response to the challenge has been extremely bureaucratic by nature. Rege argues that there have been two kinds of responses, one setting the Women's Studies Center within established mainstream departments, and two, having optional courses such as Women in Society, which does not bring about structural changes. Such a response allows mainstream foundational courses to remain unchallenged. Rege, while reflecting on the state of pedagogy, draws heavily on the feminist pedagogical practices and discourses. According to her, feminist pedagogical practices legitimize personal experiences, recognize both teachers and students, that they bring text of their own to the classroom, and recognize that common vocabularies are not given but have to be developed. Thus, it is not easy as it pushes us from positions of authority to vulnerability. Sociology has not been able to develop and nurture such pedagogical practices in the classroom which pushes students to feel disconnected with the discipline, thereby leading to a state of crisis. In order to deal effectively with such crises, it is important to ground self-reflexivity, and critical impulses have to be rooted in conscious praxis in the classroom. Such a process will go a long way to tackle issues of crisis affecting the discipline. Sujata Patel, linking the macro and the micro worlds. Engaging with the debate, Sujata Patel presented a paper titled Challenges to Indian Sociology as a theme paper at the All India Sociological Conference at Hyderabad in 1907. It is an important argument that provides a larger macro framework to the issues with regard to crises in sociology that one has been discussing in this module. In the paper, three important questions are raised. First, what is this crisis? Second, how do we map its discursive space? And finally, how does this mapping help us to formulate the challenge that we face in sociology? Patel, a historical sociologist, draws connections between the macro and the micro and states that such concerns with the state of the discipline has always been part of the legacy of sociology. Drawing on the specific critical work of Alvin Goldner, Crisis of Western Sociology, Patel argues that if one wants to analyze a crisis in sociology, then one has to understand the interlinkages between macro-micro worlds structuring the discipline. What would then be the macro and the micro worlds? According to Patel, the macro worlds would include areas of inquiry such as policies of higher education, fiscal policies, impact of such policies, especially funding for higher education, political agenda for and of higher education, challenging the relationship of particular subjects with career options in the context of changing economy. The micro, on the other hand, includes areas such as classroom, social morphology, the pedagogic techniques and ideologies determining the process of learning. According to Patel, the interlinking of the macro and the micro processes defines and structures this discipline. If one maps out the discipline, the picture that emerges is that as it follows. The discipline grew extensively in the post-independence period, but over the last few years there have been a leveling down of it. The leveling down is accompanied by changing profile of students. What does it mean? According to her, the university and colleges see the increasing presence of women and men from deprived communities such as tribes and Dalits, who raises questions of language, representation, culture and knowledge. Questions such as what is taught, in which language it is being taught, whether such knowledge is relevant, how do we define sociological literature, questions. Patel argues that it shakes the very identity of the discipline itself, but the issue is whether the discipline addresses these concerns. Adding to these questions is the gradual but steady erosion of relevance. Patel argues that initially when sociology was institutionalized in the post-independence period, it had taken up the role of understanding the new society that was being constructed and the identity that was being established through the works of caste, tradition, modernity, social change, development and such. But in recent times, one can perceive a much fractured discipline that does not seem to have a clear-cut agenda. Thus, for Patel, the crisis is not only institutional but also ideological, relating to the structures of higher education, the economy, the political as well as that of the paradigm of the discipline. Sociology, according to Patel, is posed within an epistemic challenge which includes two critical movements, feminist and environmental. How far the discipline has interpolated these two challenges in research and teaching is subject to scrutiny. For sociology to reach its full potential and deal with crises, what one needs is critical reflexivity, which has to be developed in the classrooms. This reflexivity has to be reflected both in our methodological as well as pedagogical tools. Heutkar, Elitist versus Vernacular Sociology. Building on the debate by theorizing on the need to place the argument of crisis within uneven development and institutionalization of the discipline within regions is the article by Jha. In his article titled Indian Sociology in Crisis, the Need for Regional Orientation, Jha argued that the crisis debate needs to be contextualized within the regional question. What did it actually refer to? How was it different from the earlier scholars who argued that we need to understand the crisis in terms of the practices of sociology within substandard parameters in many sociology departments spread over the country? Jha developed a conceptual framework of elite sociology versus vernacular sociology, which he believed would help one to understand the crisis facing sociology in India. Jha argued that the state in the post-independence period followed a strategy of expansion of higher education system. Under this strategy, a number of universities and colleges were established in different states, and in most of them sociology was introduced as a subject. There has been a massive growth of colleges, universities and research institutions where either sociology is taught or researched or both. According to Jha, while this may refer to the growing popularity of the discipline, this expansion does not really reflect that sociological knowledge and understanding of Indian society has also grown in vigor and rigor. The much obvious argument of Jha is that mere expansion and growth of professional sociology cannot ensure that the generation of valid and reliable knowledge and understanding of society. In fact, it is this unplanned expansion without ensuring maintenance of standards that has landed sociology in crisis. Historical analysis reveal that in the pre-independence period, the chief centers of doing sociology included Calcutta, Lucknow and Bombay. This legacy was challenged in post-independence period when Delhi started emerging as a great center of learning. The issue was not so much the emergence of Delhi and other national centers, such as referred to by Veena in this module. Thus, sociology, which was established in the first quarter of 20th century and by 2001, sociology was taught in more than 100 universities. Increasingly, research centers and departments of sociology were established. Such expansion cannot ensure generation of valid and reliable knowledge and understanding. Furthermore, such an expansion has led to a crisis in terms of regional crises. Sociology started flourishing in the elitist centers where the medium of instruction was solely English, which Jha referred to as the practice of elitist sociology. In most of the other universities and colleges established in the states, one could see the pursuance of vernacular sociology, where the medium of instruction includes local or regional languages, referred by Jha as vernacular sociology. According to Jha, the reason for such a discrepancy was a policy of higher education followed by the Indian state. Based on the Government of India Act of 1919, education policy was devolved to provincial ministries. The takeover of education by provincial state governments after 1921 was associated with educational expansion at all levels. According to Jha, two important arguments were being stated that in order to maintain and promote the quality of education, one must oppose its expansion. At the same time, it was asserted that quality of education and learning depended completely on the proficiency in language. The equation that was being emphasized was quality of education was equivalent to proficiency in English language. How did this happen? Jha argues that after independence there has been two strategies with regard to higher education. On the one hand, central government established many universities and research centers, and the other, higher education policy was placed in the purview of state governments. Such a policy, according to Jha, led to the emergence of two kinds of universities and centers. One, high quality equal central universities, and the other, low quality associated with regional state universities. How did this happen? Jha argues that after independence there were two strategies with regard to higher education. On one hand, central government established many universities and research centers, and on the other, higher education policy was placed in the purview of the state governments. Such a policy, according to Jha, led to the emergence of two kinds of universities and centers of learning. One, high quality equal with central universities, and other, low quality associated with regional or state universities. State governments established universities, and over the years one has seen considerable increase in the number of state universities all over India. Further, there is great variations between states. There are considerable differences between state universities with regard to resources, political will, pressures and demands. There is also a wide gap of differences between the state and the central universities with regard to issues such as excessive political and bureaucratic control, mismanagement, acute shortage of funds and resources. As compared to state universities, central universities are centrally funded. There is a presence of superior standards of campus life, high encouragement to research by faculty, great infrastructural facility and better life chances for research and faculty in academic departments. The difference is greater when we analyze the issue of language. Jha refers to the first tier central universities in which English is only the medium of instruction. Emergence of these universities seems to have facilitated the growth of elitist sociology. The second tier consists of state universities where the local or regional languages are generally used for teaching. With the rise in the number of state universities, vernacular sociology has grown in size. Then it is important to contextualize what are the challenges while teaching in regional vernacular sociology departments. It includes scarcity of good textbooks. Many regional languages books have concepts which are misleading and confusing. Student depends on spurious and inauthentic guidebooks leading to dilution of standards. Students generally dependent on classroom notes dictated by teacher in respective languages, quality of which is dubious. Adding on to this is the poor and inadequate physical facilities in many departments and colleges. Dev, while writing about challenges of teaching in a regional university, stated that it is difficult to maintain certain academic standards. There is a need for teachers to be creative in their effort at reading and writing. Additionally, teachers have to make immense efforts at making students feel passionately for the subject, but the authority structure works against the interest of the discipline. Such a feeling is also reiterated by Jairam in his article Challenges to Indian Sociology, where he argues that there has been lamentable decline in the standards of MPhil dissertations and PhD theses. Further, according to him, one has to recognize that teaching sociology in Indian languages to students is a challenge which needs to be addressed. Ramesh, Bairy, Rethinking the Debate. Bairy argues that now there is a need to rethink the debate with regard to the crises. Rather than addressing the hopelessness and despair plaguing sociology, one needs to think what could be done is to accept the fact that things have gone wrong, and now we need to think positively about it. For Bairy, in the whole debate, the voice of the students was absent, especially the voices of undergrad students. It is important to remember that the students have lot of stake in the discipline and are therefore crucial to the sociological imagination. Bairy argues in favor of relooking at the idea of instrumentality. This for him has to be analyzed. It is important for sociology to be restructured so that it becomes relevant to policy and applied research. Such a restructuring could renew vigor among the students and consequently the discipline itself. The question is not about replacing the pure fundamental research with utilitarian sociological research. It is not about replacing one with the other, but bringing together both the approaches to work with one another. Bairy argues that the ideal way of reimagining a postgraduate course in sociology will be to, after a sufficient and thorough grinding in theory and methodology, offer different specializations translated into concrete skills. Sociologists should explore multiple ways in which sociological skills could be used in diverse spheres such as media, civil services, NGO and industry, especially corporate social responsibility. We need to remember that one of the primary needs of education is to ensure honorable livelihood option. Thus, a sociologist's challenge lies in making sociology that is taught at undergrad level translate itself into a specific set of concrete skills that are in demand, while of course keeping the students' options open to pursue a higher specialized degree in sociology. Conclusion. Here it is important to tie the strings of the debate discussed until now so that one does not lose a sense of the arguments made so far. Reading and analyzing the arguments presented above, one can state the following. The crisis in sociology is a concern that needs much attention. The issue refers not only to the quality of the students and the lack of commitment, but also to the lack of critical reflection among academicians themselves. Further, the issue is not of lack of resources, but also about the distribution of these resources. It has also to do with the question of language, the space granted to some categories of privileged language, for example, English. Additionally, the crisis is closely related to the manner in which identity discourses are engaged with. It is also important to link the crisis with not only the micro processes but also the larger structural macro processes. The crisis lies not only on relying on Western theories, concepts, but also in uncritical application of the framework of the indigenous. It is important to realize that it is not only the institutional structures which can contribute to the making of the crisis, but also the students and academics within them. In this module titled Crisis of Sociology in India, especially focusing on research, teaching and practices, we focused on the debate of crises, especially with how the different kinds of sociologists have engaged with the debate. But most of them have come up with various issues relating to the debate, especially with the lack of professionalization among sociologists in India, the kind of lack of commitment, especially in terms of theoretical and methodological rigor with regard to research done by sociologists in India. The responsibility in terms of engaging with the crisis lies not only in terms of understanding ourselves, in terms of how do we approach the discipline, but also in terms of how do students learn the discipline and how do teachers teach the students the discipline itself. We also need to be very much aware of the historical context in which sociology is introduced in India and also understand the macro-micro interlinkages which would help us to understand as to why sociology in India is facing the crisis that it is facing today. Thank you.